welcome back to Halloween House. So this is part 4 of the Rodney Alcala story, or the dating game killer, his whole saga. In the other videos, we did explain that we're going to be doing it in parts. But don't click away thinking you're going to be lost, because you're not. We made the stories about the victims. And we do kind of recap what was said in the other videos. So you're not going to be lost. Just don't click out, follow along. And we'll tell you if you need to go back and watch another video. But they're pretty easy to follow, even though we're doing it in parts. So, what part are we on?
4.
Yes. Okay. Take it, Sandy.
Oh, boy. So, we did discuss the murders of Ellen Hover and Cornelia Crilly, and how Rodney was finally brought to justice for those crimes 40 years after they took place.
Yes, and this was in the most recent video. So we're on video 4, so that was in video 3. That's where we left off.
Yeah, so you can always follow the link and check that one out too.
Yeah, we'll post all the links in the description below.
But they're all interesting because we try to tell the stories of the women who came forward, some in 2021 even. And the one that did come forward most recently is believed to be the first surviving victim of Alcala. So that's pretty amazing. Until she came forward, Tally Shapiro was thought to be the first surviving victim.
No. So anyways, we're going to start in the summer of 1977. Alcala was in New York City. He was currently on parole for an attack on a 13-year-old girl that we only know as Julie J. And we also discussed that crime in video number 2. Just 1 month after his release from prison, his parole officer granted him permission to travel to New York to visit family. And there were no conditions placed on his travels, and he was told by his parole officer just to check back in with them when he happened to get back to LA.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I'd like to say how ridiculous that is, because he was priorly convicted for a parole violation, and at this point, that was his second prison sentence. So I would say that's pretty lenient of this parole officer. Just, go ahead, go to New York, get back to me when you can.
Yeah, it's almost
ridiculous.
Like you're their problem for a while.
Yeah.
Yikes. Sometime after July 16th of 1977, which was within days of Ellen's murder, he did begin his cross-country road trip back to LA. He was driving a yellow car and towing a blue and white Kawasaki motorcycle.
So it is on this trip that Christine Ruth Thornton becomes another victim of Alcala.
Yeah, Christine was 28 years old, and she was 6 months pregnant when she and her boyfriend left San Antonio on a road trip to go to Montana. They wanted to pan for gold, and her boyfriend returned to Texas without her. And he stated that they had an argument in Green River, Utah, and they separated, and she was never seen again. Her mom reported her missing, but the authorities didn't take it seriously. They said she was an adult and she left on her own, so she wasn't missing. Her sister Kathy spent the next 30 years trying to find Christine.
Yes.
And over the years, Kathy would track down that boyfriend again and question him, but he never changed his story. He said they had an argument and she left him and he didn't harm her, and she was alive the last time he saw her.
Yeah. I have to say this, the whole time the story was going down with Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. Laundrie, is it? Landry? Whatever.
Sure.
I was probably the only person in the entire world that wasn't convinced that Brian had something to do with Gabby's death. I mean, I thought it was more than likely, but the whole time Gabby was missing, I just kept thinking about this case. Like, this really did happen. She left her boyfriend after an argument, and Rodney Alcala got a hold of her and murdered her, and her boyfriend had nothing to do with it. But he did spend his whole life, under suspicion, and it was crazy. We know how the Gabby Petito story ended, unfortunately, but I just couldn't believe the similarities, and weird things happen.
Especially when you're out in remote areas.
Yeah. And I brought it up to a few people. I'm like, you never know. Maybe they really did have an argument, and Gabby ran away from Brian and she ran into another bad situation or another character. You just never know.
Yeah.
Of course, we know now. But in Christine's case, that really did happen. She had an argument with her boyfriend. She left them and she ran into Rodney Alcala, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sadly, Christine and her unborn child's skeletal remains were found in April of 1982. They were in Granger, Wyoming, and that's about 500 miles north of Green River, Utah, where she was last seen alive by her boyfriend. We don't know how she encountered Alcala or how she ended up so far away from where they parted, but
With her boyfriend.
Yeah. Christine and her child would remain unidentified for 33 years.
Yes. So it took 6 years, 5 or 6 years to find her, and she would remain a Jane Doe for 3 decades.
More than her lifetime.
So in 2014, Christine's sister Kathy, who was 11 years younger than Christine, she was looking through a photo collection of Alcala's, and we did discuss this in video number 1. Or you may be familiar with his habit of taking pictures of women and little girls, and he kept them as souvenirs. Some photos were very graphic and were pictures of supposed murder scenes. So not all of the photos were released because some of them were just too graphic. But anyways, so Kathy, Christine's sister, was looking through the released photos that Rodney Alcala took, and when she reached photo 86, she recognized a smiling face posing on a blue and white Kawasaki motorcycle in a remote desert setting. And the woman in the picture was clearly pregnant.
And Christine ended up being positively identified through DNA in 2015.
Yes, so the sister noticed the picture in 2014, notified it, put her DNA in a database, and the match was made a year later.
Yeah, thankfully, I mean, at least they could be identified and put to rest.
So we're going to skip ahead a little bit, but Rodney Alcala had a storage shed. This is discussed in number 1, but again, you might be a little familiar with this. So anyways, found in this locker was a blue and white Kawasaki motorcycle.
Ding, ding.
Yeah.
And the picture of Christine was taken in very close proximity to where they found her remains. He was interviewed. He couldn't deny that he took the photo. He was charged in 2016, but at this point, he was too old and frail to face extradition or a trial.
Because at this point, he was facing death sentence for the murder of 5 women in California. And he had already been convicted, forgive me, I forget the year, 76? No, it couldn't have been 76.
No, it was...
Late 70s, I don't remember. This is a complicated story. Anyways, he was serving a death sentence for 5 women in California by 2016. Yeah. And he had 2 25-year to life sentences in New York for the murder of Ellen and Cornelia. It's so complicated. Yes. This guy was all over the place, and he used an alias, and it's just,
Yeah.
So...
He wasn't ever officially convicted of Christine and her child's murder.
Right, because they didn't want to extradite him from death row.
It wouldn't have been worth it.
No, it would have been worth it. He just wasn't in good health. Yeah. So the telephone is ringing. Anyways. So shortly before ending his road trip from New York City to L.A., Alcala would make a stop in Seattle, and this goes to the storage shed.
Yeah.
This is where he secured a storage locker, and just because things aren't confusing enough, we're just going to confuse it a little more. When he got the storage locker, he got it under the name of a female acquaintance and used her name and address. But when she was interviewed, she said that she had no knowledge of a locker and she had no contact with Alcala since 2 years before he rented this storage shed. So I don't know how he rented it in someone else's name, like in person.
But I'm willing to bet she really didn't know.
No, I believe she didn't know, but how do you show up?
Yeah.
You can't do things online in the 70s. Like,
yeah, you would be in person.
in person, so he's just like, hey, I'm a dude and I'm gonna, whatever. He did it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a weird story. Nothing makes sense, really.
He seemed to be pretty charismatic, so I'm sure he talked his way through it.
Something. I don't know. So.
It's just crazy. But he did travel between LA and Seattle to visit his locker to store photos, photography equipment, and his victim trophies, which this is where they found one of his victim, Robin Samso's earrings in that locker.
Yeah. Which would later become a huge part of the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Much later. We got decades to go. We're only in video 4 and we're still in the 70s. That's how weird and bizarre this case is.
Mm-hmm.
So, to talk about some of his crimes in Seattle, he was never convicted nor positively tied to any murders in Washington State at that time. I forget, was it? No, the Hillside Stringers were in California. Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer? I don't remember. There's like 2 sets of serial killers loose in Washington, D.C. And Rodney's all in the mix, but he's flying under the radar because the police are suspecting Ted Bundy and I think Green River, I'm not sure. Complicated. But anyways, so he was a longtime suspect in the murder of Antoinette Walker. She was 13 and she was known to friends and family as Tony. She disappeared on July 9th, 1977, and her body was later found a week later. Of course, Rodney was later ruled out because he was in New York City at the time. Remember, he killed Ellen on July 16th of 1977. So after something like 40 years, he was finally ruled out for Antoinette Walker's murder, but her murder wasn't never solved, which is really sad.
Yeah. He does remain the prime suspect in the murder of Joyce Gaunt. On February 17th, 1978, her body was found in a picnic area at Seward Park that's located in southeast Seattle.
Yes, and he's also a suspect in the disappearance of Cherry Greenman, who was 19. She vanished from Waterville, Washington in September of 1976, and she was never found. And Waterville is about 170 miles east of Seattle.
Wow.
He got around. He got around.
It's really unclear what evidence the authorities believe they have to tie Alcala to these crimes. But the sad part is, without DNA, there's probably little hope of positively naming him as the perpetrator
of these crimes. So we're going to go ahead and leave it there. In the next video, we're going to pick up in LA, where Alcala starts to work for the LA Times, Los Angeles Times, as a typesetter. And it's during this time he makes his appearance on the Dating Game. We'll talk about how a serial killer and rapist ends up on a dating game. And this is also believed when he is to be the most active in his killing spree. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, and also stay spooky. Thank you for watching.